All right, everyone, we're going to move on to our next workshop. Steve Suess is the Communications Division Director for the Libertarian Party of Illinois. Steve has worked with both commercial and non-commercial radio, as well as public relations and media education. Suess currently works and manages 1033's WZND Fused Radio in Normal, Illinois, and has previously worked for WJBC in Bloomington, WGLT in Normal, and WRDL in Ashland, Ohio. Steve is a member of the McLean County Libertarian Party and serves as a precinct committeeman in Bloomington. He is currently running for McLean County Board and previously ran for office in Normal Township with the party. In his workshop, you'll learn how to work with the media and craft professional press releases sure to capture the media's interest. Please welcome Steve Suess.
Thanks, Bennett. All right, I'm actually glad I went after Julie and John because this is, we're going to talk a little bit about how chapters can work with media and press. Kind of a piggyback almost. We'll also be talking about how candidates can work with the press a little bit and some tips on that. So anybody who's thinking about running for office or currently running for office, that might help out as well. So let's go ahead and get started. We'll start with some just basics as to what you should expect from the press as either a libertarian candidate or a libertarian chapter chair who's trying to promote your events. So when we go ahead and look at what we're looking at here, first things first, nothing is going to be handed to you, whether you're a candidate or a chapter chair, okay? It is up to you as someone who is promoting libertarian ideas to promote those ideas to the press. Broadcast stations are also struggling, particularly local ones, okay? And particularly in rural downstate areas, okay? So newsrooms are working on a bare-bones staff. They're working on a bare-bones budget right now. So you need to spoon-feed the press the information that you want them to know. So, again, it is your responsibility to make sure that the press is covering you, not necessarily their responsibility to find out the things that you are doing, okay? Next thing is very important, okay? And this is something that I specifically wanted to address this audience with because as libertarians, we are frequently skeptical of the media, okay? Local media is not out to get you, okay? Very, very rarely that might be the case, okay? But the press is not only your resource, but they are also a friend. They need you as much as you need them, okay? They have content to fill. Every day when an editor or a news director comes to their newspaper or their broadcast station, they're looking for content to fill time or to fill a page, okay? They need the stuff that you guys are doing to help fill that content. So they're looking at you as a resource. They're not looking at you as some kind of political opponent or something like that. We can look at national media and, you know, your CNNs of the world and what have you, and we can say, yeah, those guys suck, right? But if you're running for school board, you're not going to be talking to CNN, okay? You're going to be talking with your local newspaper. You're going to be talking with a local radio station or two. Potentially the nearest TV market might cover you. So make sure that you guys are not coming into interactions with the press from a negative aspect because you have that negative connotation to national media, okay? Your local AM radio station, your local newspaper is not CNN or the New York Times, okay? They're coming at it from a different perspective, and they genuinely want to have your content and hear your perspective, okay? They would not have reached out to you for that if they didn't, all right? So make sure that you're coming in with a positive attitude and you're fostering relationships with the press, and we'll talk about that a little bit more too. So some things you should expect as a chapter chair from the press, okay? Specifically, you're looking at questions about events or initiatives that your chapter is putting on, okay? Generally, as a chapter chair, the media will not reach out to you unless you have sent a press release or something blew up on social media, okay, like an event or something like that. As a chapter chair, you're pretty much looking at things that you have spoon-fed the press and they're looking for some more details on. Now, as a candidate, you could possibly be contacted by the press even if you haven't sent anything out, okay? And that's because the press covers, or at least should cover, elections thoroughly, okay? So you could get questions about your platform, your ideas, any specific events that you're putting on, fundraisers, requests to appear in debates, and things like that. We're going to go a little bit more in depth into press requests and interviews a little bit later. First thing I want to talk about, though, is how to contact the press. Because a lot of people are they're just not aware of when you should contact the press, okay? And we're also going to talk about on the next slide when not to contact the press, okay? So here are some things where you should actually, write a press release, make a phone call, instances where you should reach out to the media, okay? As a chapter chair, when you form a new chapter, you should put out a press release to local media that says, hey, we exist, okay? That's pretty much the first thing that you should do when you start a new chapter, okay? The good news is, in the briefcase on the Illinois Libertarian Party website, there is a boilerplate press release that you basically just fill in the blanks, and then you can send it to local media, okay? So you put in your chapter name, when your meetings are, all that good stuff, and then you send it out, okay? And if anybody needs help finding that, please let me know. If you guys have changes in chapter leadership, chapters will be getting new chapter chairs, other officers, that type of thing. That probably deserves some press contact as well, okay? If your chapter is hosting a significant event, fundraiser, something like that, a charity event, that's especially charity events, that's awesome press coverage, okay? Specifically charity events, media is going to pick that up almost every time, okay? So consider writing a press release for that. And then finally, when your chapter is spearheading some type of political initiative. Some good examples of that would be the Fox Valley chapters trying to end the home rule in East Dundee. That's excellent. Here in McLean County, we're trying to get rid of the Bloomington Election Commission. That's another one. So anything that's politically related but not necessarily something about a candidate or your chapter, you should probably be promoting as well, okay? As a candidate, things that you should contact the press about, okay? So these are just some general ideas of when you should be talking to the press as a candidate. First, you need to contact the press when you decide you're going to run for office, okay? And please make sure that you're actually going to run for office when you decide to contact the press, because that's like the point of no return, right? When you tell your local radio station, your local TV station, your local newspaper, hey, I'm running for this office, that's when you're running for the office, right? So don't get really ambitious and decide, hey, I'm going to run for this office, and then back out, because now there's a bunch of local press coverage where people are going to be looking for your name and hearing from you, but they won't see it, okay? So when you announce your candidacy, make sure that you're doing that. When you're like a chapter, if you're a candidate and you're hosting an event, if you're hosting a fundraiser, if you're part of someone else's charity event and they haven't necessarily sent out a press release saying you'd be there, then please alert the press to that as well. As a candidate, I would suggest that everyone gets involved with local charities, and local charities don't always send out press releases for their events. So if you're going to be at something that a local charity's doing, a pancake breakfast or something like that, put out your own press release and let the press know that you're going to be there. Finally, and this one can kind of come and go because it's subjective, okay, and we'll talk about that in the next slide too. Responses to your opponent or the incumbent's political positions on topical political decisions that they're making, okay? Emphasis on topical, okay, and significant, all right? And we'll talk about that more in the next slide. So the next slide is when you should not contact the press, okay? There are several times when you might think, man, I should really reach out to the press about this, but not necessarily a great time, and we'll talk about why as well. All right, so when not to contact the press, chapter chairs. When you adopt new bylaws, parliamentary procedure type things, half of us in the room don't really care that much about that. So the press isn't going to care about it either, and neither is the audience for that newspaper, for that radio station, for that television station. Regular business meetings. You do not need to put out a press release every single month for your regularly scheduled time and business meeting. Okay? Same if your business meeting like changes 1 month or something like that. Now, there is one exception. Okay? A lot of local newspapers have, and some radio stations have this too, like a community calendar on their website. Okay? I would suggest that you guys add those things to the community calendar on those sites, but make sure that you are contacting the correct person. Okay? So you're going to send the press releases to a general newsroom email, or if you have a relationship with a reporter, those reporters. Okay? Most community calendars have a specific email that you submit things to. Or sometimes there'll be like a web form or something like that on the newspaper or station's website. Okay? So make sure you're contacting the correct person about that. Right? As a candidate, some things that you want to avoid. Okay? You should not just be a press release machine if you are a candidate. All right? Don't just put out a press release for every platform point that's on your website. Okay? If people are interested, they will go there. Okay. Campaign team meetings, things that aren't generally for the public, but more for your campaign team. The press doesn't need to know about that because the public doesn't need to know about that. It's kind of your own thing, right? It's internal. It's inside baseball, right? And then finally, responses to incumbent or opponent insignificant and not topical things, okay? So, for example, if you are a candidate running right now for statewide office and you want to put a press release out about something your opponent did about gun legislation, that's topical and significant right now, right? Now, if your opponent or the incumbent votes on a bill regarding animal abuse, that's not topical and really not that significant at the moment in the news cycle, okay? So use these things sparingly and use your best judgment. Now, the main reason... Now, some of you are probably under the impression, well, I should probably contact the press as much as possible so I can get more press coverage. In theory, that works, but in practice, it does not, and the main reason is spam, okay? When you start contacting the press for insignificant things, that's when the press puts you on their spam list, and you will never have anything you put out picked up by the press again. Okay? So you have to use your resources wisely. Contact the press for things that are important, and avoid contacting the press for things that are not. Okay? All right, let's talk about some things that you're going to utilize to contact the press. All right, the first and foremost one is a press release. It's a sheet of paper that basically says, here's what's happening. All right, so the basics of press releases. All right, first thing, when should you write a press release? We just talked about when you should and should not contact the press. Please only write press releases for when we said you should contact the press. That would be great. To whom you should deliver a press release? Now, this depends on what type of candidate you are. If you're a statewide candidate, you should probably send it to a statewide mailing list. Okay? If you're a local candidate, only contact local media. Again, this is a great way to get on a spam list. Okay? If you're running for school board in Champaign, you don't want to send a bunch of stuff to WGN in Chicago. Okay? It's just going to get blocked. Right? All press releases should be delivered electronically in 2018. Okay, very old school to like mail a press release to a newspaper or a radio station or a television station. Generally, those are not going to get picked up. Okay, a lot of those just end up in the trash. Email is your best resource here. Okay, do not deliver a press release via like Facebook message to a newspaper's like Facebook page or a radio station's Facebook page. That makes us look unprofessional. Okay, so try to find an email address. What types of things should you include? important information only and important information first. And we'll talk about some writing tips with press releases in a little bit, and that's going to be one thing that we focus on a lot. Finally, what should you expect after sending a press release? Honest to God, not much. Okay? As much as I hate to say it, a lot of the press releases you send out might not garner a lot of attention. Okay? And this goes back to the point where we were talking about where the local media industry is. Right? Local newspapers, local radio stations, local TV stations, not doing very well right now. Bare bones staff. Okay? So they really don't have a lot of time to cover things that are lower on the totem pole of newsworthiness. Okay? Chicago, it's going to be much tougher to get something picked up. Downstate, not a lot going on. So send press releases and you might get lucky. All right. So let's talk about formatting a press release. And I know this is hard to read, okay? And this is basically a template of a press release, okay? This exact how-to guide is on the briefcase on the Illinois Libertarian Party website. So chapter chairs, you have access to that political division. You can give this to candidates, and we'll be all good. All right. So the first thing on the press release, you got to have some type of letterhead. Okay. Basically, it's got your address, a logo, make it look pretty. If you need help creating one, find someone who knows graphics. If you don't know anybody who knows how to do graphic design, ask other people that might be in this room or on a phone call where you might be talking with other libertarians, because we have plenty of resources and people who know how to do that stuff. Next couple things, we have 2 dates, okay? The first date is what's called an embargo date, and the second one is the date that it's sent, right? Date that it's sent is pretty self-explanatory. That's the day you send the press release, right? Embargo date, a lot of times for 99% of your press releases is going to be the same as the sent date, okay? However, if you are maybe waiting to announce your candidacy at an event or something like that, you can embargo that press release and say, hey, don't talk about this story until this date, okay? You might use that. Very rarely are you probably going to use that, right? Next, we have a headline or contact information, underneath that. Make sure the press knows how to get a hold of you, okay? And then we have a headline, okay? Just like a newspaper headline, right? Press releases are specifically designed to look like newspaper articles and read like newspaper articles, because that makes it easier for the newspaper to copy and paste your press release into the newspaper, okay? Even if no one contacts you about a press release, a lot of times it'll just happen, and you'll see it in the paper, okay? Then we have a byline, which is basically the city that it's coming out of in all caps. Again, if anybody reads the newspaper, this should look familiar to you, okay? Then we have the body, and then at the very bottom, a couple things that you want to include, okay? You want to include a little piece at the bottom that just says, hey, I am available for interviews regarding this story. Here's how to contact me, okay? It seems pretty redundant to put contact information at the top and contact information at the bottom, but reporters are very busy people, and they might look over it, okay? So make sure that you let the press know, hey, I can do an interview about this. And then finally, some formatting things, okay? A press release is always going to end with a dash, 3 hashtags, and then another dash. Okay, if it goes on to a second page, the first page would end with a dash, 30, and a dash. Don't ask me why. It's a long story. It goes back to like when press releases were sent over telegraph, but it's still general formatting, standard, industry standard stuff that's being done today. So that's a formatting of a press release. Again, I know this is a lot of information. This exact document, along with instructions for what each thing is available in the briefcase. So please go and look at that. All right, some writing tips. Some writing tips for the body of your press release. Okay? 4 C's here. Clear, concise, correct, complete. Might sound familiar to you, Chris. So make sure that everything that you are writing is 100% clear as to what you are saying. All right, your main point should get across right away. Concise, again, bare bones newsrooms all over the state. Reporters don't have time to read a 3-page press release. Okay, you can get your main point across in a matter of 1 page almost 100% of the time. Make sure all the information is correct. You don't want to accidentally have the wrong date on a press release and then no one comes to your event. That kind of makes sense. And then finally, make sure that all the information is there. Okay. Next is inverted pyramid style. Okay. This seems complicated, but it's super easy. Okay. All that inverted pyramid writing style means is that the most important information comes first, and it keeps being followed by the least important information, or information that backs up the most important information. Okay? So that means in the first paragraph of your press release, you should have the who, the what, the where, and the when. Okay? What's going on, who's going to be there, when is it, and where are you going to be at? Right? That's your first paragraph of the press release. Then your next paragraphs are the why and the how. Right? Here's why we're doing this event. Here's how we're putting it on. Okay? So the most important information for your press release comes first, and there are several reasons for this. Again, reporters are busy, right? So a lot of times reporters will read the first paragraph of a press release, and if they don't think it's newsworthy, trash. Okay? It's going in the recycling bin. The other reason is, again, we talked about earlier how newspapers will copy and paste a press release into a newspaper. If they don't have room for your entire press release, they might just take the first couple paragraphs. Okay? If you put the most important information at the bottom, it's not going to make the newspaper. Okay? So having your most important information first in a cut copy paste situation makes sure that the most important information is ending up in the newspaper. Press releases should be written in AP style. It's Associated Press style. Again, we mentioned that press releases should look and feel like a newspaper article. AP style is some weird rules. It's formatting most of it. You know, AM and PM, times, dates, spelling out numbers, stuff like that. This is an easy Google search for you. Okay, there's lots of online resources for AP style. I see Jake. Oh, Jake's got a style book back there. There you go. And then finally, always remember who you're talking to. Okay? Your press releases are going to look different than the things you're putting on your website or your Facebook page, right? Because the audience is different. You're not talking to voters. You're not talking to volunteers. You're talking to the press, okay? So think about what they want to hear, what they want to see, what they want to read, and put it in your press release. Next, we're going to talk about interviews and getting requests from the press for interviews. Okay? So, first thing you should do prior to the interview, right? Very first thing, establish a relationship with the person you're being interviewed by. Okay? Whether it's a broadcast reporter, a print reporter, and know the difference between print and broadcast, too. A print interview, you can take your time. Right? When you're asked a question in a print interview with a newspaper reporter, you can sit there and think about your answer and then respond. If you do that in a broadcast interview, you're going to get kicked off the air. In radio and TV, time is money. Okay, so you got to be quick on your feet and make sure that you have responses to whatever questions are being asked. Next, you need to know what the interview is going to be about and practice your talking points. Okay? You can have notes with you when you go to an interview. That's fine. Typically, television is not very fond of you having like note cards or sheets of paper on air. But radio and print, you know, those interviews are fine. But practice your talking points. Know what you're talking about and stay on topic. Next, you're going to want to find verifiable, unbiased sources for your talking points. Okay? Because what might happen in an interview is the reporter might ask you a question, you give an answer, and then they might follow up with, okay, where did you get this from? You don't want to be stumped on that question. Okay? You do not want to have an I don't know moment when a reporter asks you, where did you get that information? So make sure that you guys are getting some verifiable talking points. Next, and finally, before the interview, it's okay to ask what the interview is going to be generally about. Okay? Most of the time, you should know this already, but a follow-up question is fine. One thing you do not ever want to do, though, is ask for interview questions before the interview takes place. Do not do that, okay? Doing that makes us look amateur. It makes us look unprofessional and ill-prepared. Okay? So specific questions, don't ask for them. But very fair to ask for general ideas. All right, so what happens when you show up? Okay? Or they show up to you. During the interview, stay on message. All right, remember those talking points and remember the sources for those talking points that you had. Okay? Mention your sources for the information without even being asked. Okay? So instead of saying, instead of giving a statistic with no source behind it, say where the statistic came from. Okay? Generally, a reporter is going to be very impressed, and that will also eliminate the response question where they're trying to figure out where you got your information from. Okay? You're going to look very prepared if you bring it up without even being asked. Next thing goes to something we talked about earlier with the negative perception of the media that some libertarians have. Do not be combative in an interview. Okay? Being combative in an interview is the easiest way to make yourself look bad. Right? Even if the interviewer is starting to poke at you a little bit, trying to get you to be combative, don't fall into the trap. Okay? Almost 100% of the time, you are not going to come out looking good after the end product. Finally, get individual contact information from the reporter. So you might have been emailing or calling back and forth with this reporter or this interviewer with like a general email, like newsroom@newspaper.com or news@radiostation.com, whatever it was. Make sure you get an individual contact information with them and you establish a relationship. Okay? That's going to be important after the interview as well. You're going to want to follow up with a thank you email because any coverage is good coverage when you're a libertarian, and you might need them in the future. Ask them if the story is going to be online somewhere, and this is important. You want to get as many eyes and ears on whatever came out about you or your chapter as possible. So if you can share a story from that newspaper's website or share a podcast from that radio station's website to your chapter page, your candidate page, that's going to be very important. Okay? Finally, and this is another never ask for an interview to be redacted or unpublished after you've done the interview. Okay? This goes back to don't ask for questions beforehand. It makes us look very ill-prepared. It makes us look like we're amateur and that we don't know what we're doing. Okay? If you do an interview and you don't like the way you look in it or there's something you said that you wish you didn't, you can respond to that on your own social media channels, on your website, but don't contact the reporter and say, hey, can you take this down? Because it makes us look bad. Okay? All right. Finally, we're going to talk about some press kits for candidates because this is something that I get questions about a lot and what we should include in press kits. Okay? First thing you need to understand about a press kit, it's what we call in media a living document. Okay, it's a living document. Living document means that it changes frequently. Okay? It's not something you make once and then just set aside. All right? You're adding to it. You're changing things in it. It's a living document. Okay? First thing that should be in your press kit, the press release where you said, I'm running for office. Okay? If you're a candidate. That has all your basic information in it, and that's the first thing that the media organization should see. Next thing is contact information, because that's what the media wants from you. Finally, we're getting to some more graphic things that the news organization can use. Okay? We're talking about headshots. Please get professional headshots. When we say professional, it doesn't necessarily have to be, someone you pay to take pictures, but don't just crop yourself out in a picture from a bar. Okay? Not good. All right? Yeah, with the drink in your hand, yeah. Logos. Okay? You want different versions of your campaign logo if you have one. If you don't, that's okay. Again, I would suggest contacting someone, seeing who can do graphic design skills and getting something made. And then finally, other photos for media use. You don't want your headshot and your logo used in every story that the media uses about you. Try to get some action photos. Maybe it's you in a parade. Maybe it's you speaking at an event. Okay? Get some action shots that the media can use so they have different pictures for different stories about you. Hopefully there's lots of stories about you. That would be great. Good ones. Next, you're going to want to write a short personal biography. Where you work, how many kids you have, what your family look like, your experience on certain issues or for the office that you're running for, and possibly where you go to church, especially in rural areas. That can be a very important thing to include in the short bio, okay, if you do. So things, again, short biography, okay? Next, you're going to want a short description of your platform and pillars, okay? Do not put your entire platform verbatim in your press kit. That's not what a press kit's for, okay? Press kit is for quick and dirty information. We need to know what you're about in 1 page or less, okay? So make sure you've got short versions of your platform in the press kit. Next, brief information about your local or state chapter if you're running as a partisan candidate under the LP banner, okay? If you're running for a nonpartisan race, like a school board or something like that, you don't have to include any libertarian stuff. But if you are running as a libertarian with an L next to your name on the ballot, please include some brief information about your local chapter, the state party, and possibly national as well. Finally, and this is where the living document stuff comes in a lot, you want a press release archive, so every press release you've ever sent should be attached to your media kit. And then last but not least, links to previous press coverage. So if there's a web story from a newspaper, put a link to it. There's a podcast from a radio station, put a link to it. If there's a video on a TV website, put a link to that too. So that's a press kit. Final thoughts on working with the media here. Again, the press is your friend. And make sure that you're using them to your advantage and not spoiling that opportunity by ruining that relationship. Okay? Remember who your audience is. Talking to voters and volunteers on Facebook and your website is different than talking to the press, right? So tailor the message to media organizations. Use training and resource materials in the briefcase, all right? Again, we've got a sample press release, a boilerplate new chapter press release where you just type in your chapter name and that type of stuff, and you're all good. And then we've also got some directions on writing press releases too, okay? And then finally, ask for help if you're confused or if you want it or need it, okay? communications@lpillinois.org. Email, I'll respond, I'll help you out, okay? So there you go. Any questions? Comments? Yeah, Chris. That's fine. If they want to send you the questions beforehand, that's great. And some interviewers will do that. Specifically, broadcast interviewers do that a lot because they know it's going to be kind of a fast-paced type thing. That's a good question. But never ask for them. If they give them to you, great. If not, don't worry about it. Yeah. Sure, that's going to depend on how much activism the candidate or the chapter is doing. You probably don't want to send something more than like once a week, is what I would say. Most chapters would probably send something, a month, every other month when they're doing a special event or a fundraiser or something like that. A candidate is going to do pretty much the same thing. Now, if you're heavily involved and you're doing events all the time, then you're obviously going to send more press releases. But I would say frequency is less important than focusing on the important things that the media really cares about. So if you're doing stuff that the media cares about more often, then yeah, send press releases more often. Yeah. Okay. Sure. It starts with when the press does pick up something important that you're doing, making sure you maintain the relationship with that person after that interview happens. That's the only way to begin press relationships. And Julie and John talked earlier about doing letters to the editor. That's different than contacting the press regarding chapter business or candidate things, right? So I would certainly still encourage letters to the editor. Again, make sure they're going to the correct people. But the only way to really foster those press relationships is to build them after you already get press contact the first time. How are we at on time? Lex, are you ready? Oh, okay. I thought you were getting up to take over. Perfect. Anybody else have questions? I did not, but happy birthday.
I'd like to make a comment.
Sure.
About, you said sending out press releases won't always be picked up, but you're making the contact with someone who now knows your name.
Right.
Knows what you're all about.
Yeah.
And it'll be easier, hopefully, next time when you try to get something through that.
Name recognition is important. So, yeah, I agree. Anything else? All right, thank you.